A struggling mechanic lends his phone to a stranded woman on a rainy afternoon. He doesn't know she's the heiress to a billion-dollar tech empire running from her own name. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The rain came in sheets, drumming against the tin roof of Bennett's auto like the world was trying to rinse itself clean. Jake Bennett stood in the dim light of his garage, wiping oil from his hands with an old rag that had seen better years. It was late. Most of the town had gone to bed hours ago, their windows glowing warm behind drawn curtains, but Jake always stayed a little longer, finishing one more brake job, tightening one more belt. Work was steady, but never enough to outrun the bills. Still, he did what he could, always had. The slam of wind against the garage door made him glance up. That's when he saw Ida's sleek black SUV pulled awkwardly onto the shoulder, just beyond the edge of his lot. Hazard lights blinked in the rain, their amber glow stuttering against the storm. Most folks around here didn't drive cars like that. It didn't fit, too polished, too expensive, too out of place. He tossed the rag on the workbench and grabbed his jacket. As he stepped out into the downpour, the cold hit him square in the face, soaking through the thin denim in seconds. The SUV's engine was dead silent, windshield wipers frozen mid-swipe, and standing beside the driver's door, arms wrapped tight around herself, was a woman. She looked up when he approached, strands of wet hair plastered to her cheek. No umbrella, no coat, just a soaked cream sweater, clinging to a frame, too proud to shiver. "Need some help?" Jake asked, raising his voice over the wind. She nodded once. "My phone died. Car just shut off. I think I took a wrong turn about 10 miles back." Her voice was steady, controlled. But her eyeshazel, glassy, carried something else entirely. Jake reached into his pocket and offered his phone. "You can use mine." She hesitated, then took it carefully, like it was something delicate. Their hands brushed cold skin against calloused palm sand. For half a second, she looked at him like he was the first real thing she'd seen in days. Jake didn't ask for her name, not yet. Some people showed up in your life with warning. Others arrived like a storm. She stood under the glow of the flickering street lamp, hair slicked to her face, rainwater running down the sleeves of her sweater. The kind of tired she wore wasn't just from the weather, it was bone deep. The kind that settles behind the eyes and doesn't let go. Jake watched her hold his phone like it might bite, thumbs hovering unsure. "Are you sure it's okay?" she asked, glancing up. Jake nodded, stepping back to give her space. "Go ahead. You look like you need it more than I do." She turned away slightly, shielding the screen from the rain, her fingers finally moving. He couldn't hear the other end of the call, but he caught snatches of her voice, quiet, urgent, clipped. "No, I told you I'm fine. I needed to get out." "No, I'm not coming back yet. I just needed time." There was a pause, a longer one. Her jaw clenched like she was swallowing words she didn't want to say. Then, "I'll call you when I'm ready." She hung up, still holding the phone for a second too long before handing it back. Jake saw the way her hand trembled, even though she tried to hide it. "Thanks," she murmured. "Sorry. I didn't mean to take up your time." Jake shrugged, slipping the phone back into his jacket. "It's no trouble. Looks like you've had a long day." She gave a half smile, the kind people make when they're too tired to fake anything better. "You could say that." "Car just died?" "Yeah. Battery's fine, I think, but something else. It just stalled and wouldn't start back up." Jake nodded, already stepping toward the hood. "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated, then reached into the driver's side and popped the latch. He opened it carefully, steam hissing faintly in the cold air. She stood nearby, arms crossed tight, not to block the rain but like she was holding herself together. Jake glanced at her from the corner of his eye. "You? From around here?" She shook her head. "Just passing through." And though she didn't say it, Jake knew. She was running from something. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't ready to stop. The storm had eased to a drizzle by the time Jake finished poking around under the hood. The SUV's engine gave a soft grumble, then purred to life like it had never stalled in the first place. He shut the hood with a solid thunk, wiping his hands on the rag hanging from his belt. "She's good to go," he said, stepping back. The woman nodded, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Thanks, really." Jake didn't push. Most folks, when they broke down on the side of the road, were quick to offer a name or some background, something to close the distance. But this woman hadn't said much at all. Just a storm-soaked sweater, a lost look in her eyes, and a phone call that sounded more like a warning than a check-in. As she moved toward the driver's side, she paused. Turned. "Claire," she said. "You know if you were wondering." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Claire?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just Claire." Fair enough. He'd met people like her before, people with stories they weren't ready to tell. People who weren't running from a place so much as from a version of themselves they couldn't bear to be anymore. "Well, just Claire," he said, folding his arms. "You might want to get that ignition coil checked if it happens again. Could be heat-related. Electronics in these things are too smart for their own good." She gave a small nod, then climbed into the SUV. The window rolled down halfway as the engine idled quietly beneath her. "I'm sorry for the trouble," she said. "And thank you for not asking questions." Jake met her eyes and shrugged. "Some people talk when they need to, others just need to keep moving." She held his gaze for a moment longer, something flickering behind her expression, like maybe she was thinking of saying more. But then she nodded once, rolled the window up, and pulled onto the wet road. No wave. No goodbye. Just taillights fading into the dark, and the faint scent of rain, and something else, something expensive left behind in the air. Jake stood there for a moment longer, watching the empty road. Claire. He had a feeling that wasn't her real name. Floor-to-ceiling glass framed the San Francisco skyline, the kind of view reserved for the few who owned pieces of the city. Inside the sleek Langford Innovations boardroom, tension crackled beneath the surface of polished professionalism. Suits lined both sides of a long obsidian table, faces stern, eyes glued to the screen at the head of the room. The headline on the muted news broadcast read, "Claire Langford missing from public eye, shareholder concerns grow." A man in his late 50s, silver-haired with a jaw sharpened by decades of cutthroat negotiations, muted the screen entirely. Victor Dane, interim CEO and longtime family associate, turned to face the board. "She's been off the radar for 11 days, he said, fingers steepled. "No press appearances, no calls, not even a check-in with legal." "She's done this before," a younger executive offered with a shrug. "Remember Zurich last year? She unplugged for a week, came back with that microgrid deal." Victor's voice hardened. "A week is not 11 days. And Zurich didn't come with national headlines and shareholder panic." Someone else cleared their throat near the end of the table. "Have we confirmed her security detail was dismissed voluntarily?" Victor nodded tightly. "All of them. Claire told them she needed time to go off script." He didn't say what they were all thinking, that Claire Langford, heir to one of the most powerful tech empires in the country, had vanished, and not even the firm's own AI-driven location tools had been able to track her. "She's smart," someone muttered. "Too smart, maybe." Victor stared out at the fog rolling in across the bay. The girl had always been sharp too, intuitive, too restless. And now, with the company preparing for a massive merger that required her signature, her silence wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous. A phone buzzed. "Still nothing?" Victor asked without turning around. "No, sir," came the reply. "Credit cards unused, phones off, jets still grounded." Victor exhaled slowly through his nose, watching the storm gather beyond the glass. Wherever Claire was, she didn't want to be found. And, if she stayed gone much longer, it wouldn't just be her reputation on the line, it would be the entire future of Langford Innovations. The bell above the diner door jingled as Jake stepped inside, shaking the last of the morning drizzle from his jacket. The place smelled like bacon grease and fresh coffee, the kind of scent that felt like comfort in a town like Ridgewell. Booths were already filling with early risers, farmers, mechanics, and the usual retirees with nowhere else to be but here, sipping from chipped mugs and trading yesterday's gossip like currency. Behind the counter, his sister, Maddie, was pouring coffee with one hand and balancing a plate of pancakes with the other. She spotted him and nodded toward his usual stool. "You look like you haven't slept," she said as he sat. Jake grunted. "Didn't finish up till almost midnight." She poured him a fresh cup, then leaned against the counter, eyebrow raised. "Late night emergency?" He hesitated, wrapping his hands around the mug. "Some woman broke down outside the shop. SUV stalled in the rain." Maddie blinked. "This town doesn't see many strangers, let alone at that hour." "She was different." He paused. "Didn't give a last name, just Claire." "Claire who?" "Didn't say. Borrowed my phone, made a weird call, then vanished into the dark like a ghost in a luxury ride." Maddie narrowed her eyes. "Luxury? Like how luxury?" "Langford. Class." Her brows shot up. "You're telling me some mystery woman in a six-figure SUV just showed up, used your phone and rolled out?" "Pretty much." Maddie leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You checked the news this morning?" Jake shook his head. "There's a whole segment running on some tech heiress that's gone off the grid." "Claire Langford. Ring any bells?" Jake's hand froze halfway to his cup. "No way." "I'm just saying," Maddie smirked. "You might have patched up a billionaire in your garage last night." By the time the lunch crowd rolled in, the story had already started to twist. Claire became Clara, then Clarissa. Some swore she had an accent. Others insisted she tipped in $100 bills. Jake said nothing more. He just drank his coffee, stared out the window, and wondered how long a woman like that could hide in a town this small. Especially when everyone had already started looking. The sound of tires crunching over gravel pulled Jake's attention away from the rusted-out pickup he was working on. He looked up from under the hood, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The same black SUV from 4 nights ago rolled into the lot, moving slow, like it didn't trust itself. And when it stopped, the driver's side door opened, and there she was again, Claire. This time, she wore a hooded jacket over her sweater, hair tied back in a loose knot, eyes shadowed with something that looked more like exhaustion than secrecy. She gave a small wave, hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. Jake tossed his rag over his shoulder and stepped forward. "Back so soon?" Claire let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "Turns out the fix didn't stick. Car's acting up again." It stalled halfway up the county road, coasted the rest of the way here. Jake nodded, motioning toward the garage. "Pop the hood. Let's take another look." As she opened the SUV, Jake leaned in, checking the connectors he'd worked on before. They were still solid, but something deeper was going unelectrical, maybe. Something trickier. "You've got a gremlin in your system," he muttered. Claire leaned against the front fender, arms crossed. "Is that a technical term?" "Absolutely," Jake said with a straight face. "I have a whole system of supernatural diagnoses." A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, the first real one he'd seen. "Well, should I be worried?" Jake glanced up. "Not unless it starts speaking Latin." She laughed genuine this time, and he caught a glimpse of someone lighter than the woman from the stormy night, someone less guarded. "This'll take a little while," Jake said. "You're welcome to wait inside." Instead of walking to the office, Claire followed him into the garage, stepping carefully around tools and old engine parts. She picked up a wrench, turned it over in her hand. "You always work alone?" she asked. Jake nodded. "Easier that way. Fewer distractions." Claire looked around, then back at him. "Maybe distractions aren't always a bad thing." She stayed. For hours. Just watching, asking questions, handing him tools, without being asked. No makeup, no pretense. Just Claire, whoever she really was, sitting on a stool in a dusty old garage, like maybe she needed something broken to fix herself, too. The afternoon sun filtered through the high windows of the garage, casting soft golden beams across the cluttered floor. The rain had given way to clear skies, but the air still smelled faintly of wet pavement and motor oil. Jake worked with a steady, rhythm-focused, methodical, the kind of quiet a man learns when his hands speak louder than his words. And beside him, seated on a rolling stool with her sleeves pushed up and a smudge of grease on her cheek, was Claire. She handed him a socket wrench without being asked. "You're getting good at this," Jake said. Giving her a sideways glance, Claire smirked. "I learn fast." She didn't say much, but she didn't need to. There was a calm about her today, less tension, less armor, like she'd let the weight she carried sit beside her, if only for a while. "So," Jake said, tightening a bolt, "this corporate break you're on? Long-planned or sudden escape?" Claire hesitated. "Somewhere in between." He didn't push. She'd given him enough, in that answer, the kind of in-between that usually meant something had gone wrong, and someone didn't want to talk about it. "I used to think I wanted everything," she continued after a pause, brushing her hair out of her face. "The fast-paced life, power, control, but lately, all of it feels noisy." Jake nodded, not looking up. "Noise'll do that, make you forget what quiet sounds like." Claire watched him, her expression softening. "And you? You ever get tired of this?" He wiped his hands and leaned back, considering. "The work? No. It's honest. Something breaks, you fix it. Doesn't lie. Doesn't pretend. People, though." Claire raised an eyebrow. "People what?" "They're trickier," he said with a half-smile. "You can't torque someone back into alignment." She chuckled, then looked down at her hands cleaner than they'd been, but still marked with the day's work. "It's strange," she said. "This place, it all feels real in a way. Nothing else has for a long time." Jake didn't respond right away. He just met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them like a current. And for a moment, the whole world slowed, just two people in a sunlit garage, sharing borrowed time before the noise came rushing back. The screen door creaked open, and the familiar patter of small feet echoed through the shop before Jake even looked up. "Dad?" Lily's voice called out, tentative but curious. "In the back, kiddo?" he answered, wiping his hands on a towel as he stepped away from the engine bay. Lily peeked around the corner, her backpack nearly as big as she was. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a crooked ponytail, and her oversized hoodie nearly swallowed her whole. She paused when she saw Claire, her wide eyes blinking behind thick-rimmed glasses. Claire looked up from the engine she'd been helping with, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Hey," she said gently. "You must be Lily." Lily nodded, inching closer, her usual shyness kicking in like clockwork. She was slow to warm up to people, especially new ones. Especially adults. Claire knelt to her level. "I'm Claire. I'm sort of a temporary assistant around here." Lily studied her for a moment. "You don't look like a mechanic." Claire smiled. "I hear that a lot." Jake watched from the side, arms folded, trying not to interfere. Lily was cautious, but her curiosity usually won out. "What's wrong with the car?" Lily asked, stepping a little closer. "Stalling," Claire said. "Your dad thinks there's a gremlin living in the wires." Lily snorted. "That's not a real diagnosis." Claire grinned. "You're right, but it sounds cooler than faulty sensor input." That earned her a small smile from Lily, and that was something. "You like tech?" Claire asked. Lily perked up. "I built my own weather tracker with a Raspberry Pi. It sends alerts to my tablet when it's gonna rain. Mostly." Claire blinked, clearly impressed. "Seriously? That's amazing." Jake tilted his head. "She's the brain of the family. I just turn wrenches." Claire looked at him, something soft in her eyes. "Brains and wrenches. Sounds like a good team." Later, as the sun dipped low and the tools were put away, Claire sat beside Lily on the office steps, listening as the girl explained her homemade coding project. Claire didn't check her phone once, didn't look distracted. She was just present. And as Jake watched them laugh over an old robot Lily, built from scrap parts, he felt something unexpected settle in his chest. something warm. Familiar. Claire didn't fit into their world, not really. But for a moment, it didn't seem to matter. Because some truths didn't need to be said out loud to feel real. The diner smelled like fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls, its worn red booths filled with regulars who didn't need menus and never had to ask for refills. Morning light slanted through the front windows, casting soft lines across the checkered floor. Claire sat at the corner booth, sleeves rolled up, apron tied haphazardly around her waist, balancing 2 plates of pancakes like she'd done it 100 times. She hadn't, but she was getting the hang of it. Maddie watched from behind the counter, smirking as Claire returned with an empty coffee pot and a sheepish smile. "You're lucky you're pretty," Maddie said, pouring fresh grounds into the machine. Claire laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I think I spilled syrup on table 5. Twice." "They'll live," Maddie replied. "Besides, you're better than half the kids I've hired." Claire looked toward the door as it jingled open. Jake walked in, cap pulled low, hands in his jacket pockets. He paused when he saw her. "You're still here?" he asked, surprised. Claire shrugged, reaching for a mug. "I like it here." Jake slid into his usual booth. "Didn't take you for the apron type." "I didn't either," she said, setting the coffee in front of him. Turns out small-town charm is mildly addictive. Jake sipped, watching her over the rim of the mug. "You hiding out, Claire?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat across from him, her expression thoughtful. "I'm figuring things out," she said finally. "The world I come from doesn't have a lot of quiet. People are always moving, always performing. Here, things feel slower, more honest." Jake nodded slowly. "People here still lie. They just can't hide behind a 10-story building when they do it." Claire smiled faintly. "Maybe. But it's the first time in a while I've wanted to stay in one place, even if it's just for a little while." They sat like that for a while in no pressure, no demands, just the sound of clinking silverware and soft conversation around them. Jake didn't ask what she was running from. She didn't explain why she stayed. Some people talk about everything. Others say what they mean in the silence between coffee sips. And in that silence, something was starting to grow. Something steady. Something real. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Claire stopped by the house. Jake had invited her for dinner. Nothing fancy, just chili in a crock pot and cornbread that Lily insisted on helping with. The kind of meal that didn't ask for much but gave everything it could. The house was modest, lived in, clean, but not polished. The kind of place where shoes by the door meant you were home and hand-drawn pictures hung proudly on the fridge. Claire wandered into the living room while Jake stirred the pot in the kitchen. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor with a large poster board spread out in front of her, glue sticks and markers scattered around her like a small hurricane. Claire crouched beside her. "What are you working on?" "It's for school," Lily said, uncapping a marker. "We have to make a family tree, pictures, names, stuff like that." Claire smiled. "That sounds fun." "It is," Lily said, then paused. "Mostly." Claire watched her carefully as Lily reached into a small shoebox and pulled out a stack of old photos. Jake holding baby Lily, a blurry snapshot of her late mom, smiling by a Christmas tree, and a crayon drawing labeled "Me and Dad," with stick figures under a rainbow. Lily held up the drawing proudly. "That's me when I was 5, Claire smiled, her hand brushing over the edges of one of the photos. "You were adorable," Lily grinned. "Still am." Claire chuckled, but her fingers lingered on a picture of Jake and his wife, a candid shot full of laughter and light. Something in her expression shifted just slightly. A tightening around her mouth. A softness in her eyes that bordered on pain. Lily looked up. "Do you have pictures of your family?" Claire's smile faltered. "Not with me." "Do they live far away?" Claire's gaze drifted to the window, unfocused. "You could say that." Jake watched from the kitchen doorway, drying his hands on a dish towel. He didn't interrupt. He knew that look, that distance, that ache that hid behind carefully chosen words. Claire handed the photo back gently. "Your family tree's going to be beautiful, Lily." Lily nodded. "You can be on it if you want." Claire blinked, startled. "I mean, you're kinda like family now," Lily said, matter of fact. Claire smiled, but it wavered. "Thanks, sweetheart. That means more than you know." Because in that moment, the child had offered something Claire hadn't had in a long time: belonging. And it hurt in a way that was almost healing. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and a man in a dark overcoat stepped into the top floor of Langford Industries headquarters. His shoes made no sound against the gleaming marble floor as he walked past glass-walled offices filled with tension and unanswered questions. He wasn't part of the usual corporate machineno badge, no clipboard. Just sharp eyes and an aura that made people sit up a little straighter. Victor Dane stood at the far end of the hall, arms crossed, looking out over the fog-draped skyline like he was trying to see through it. He turned as the man approached. "You're late," Victor said flatly. The man shrugged. "You said discreet. Discreet takes time." Victor motioned toward the corner conference room, where a screen displayed an array of headlines and still images. "Claire Langford vanishes before major merger, missing or making a move." And one particularly tabloid-worthy one. "Tech princess gone off. Grid. We can't afford to let this get out of hand," Victor said. "The board is jumpy, media's circling. Investors are asking questions I don't have answers to." "And you want me to find her?" the man replied, calmly taking a seat. "I want to know where she is, who she's with, and what she's planning. Whether she walked away or was helped." The investigator leaned back, eyeing the photos on the screen. Claire at a gala. Claire stepping into a black car. Claire smiling on stage at a product launch. 100 carefully curated versions of the same woman. "And if she doesn't want to be found?" Victor's jaw tightened. "Then you find her anyway." The man nodded slowly, pulling a leather notebook from his coat. "Last known location?" Victor handed him a file. Inside, credit card statements, an unused flight itinerary, the canceled driver service, and a copy of the resignation letter Claire had drafted but never sent. "She disappeared 12 days ago," Victor said. "No phone activity, no bank transactions. She walked off the edge of the map." The man stood. "Then I'll start where the map ends." As he left the building, the glass doors shut behind him with a whisper, and the weight of Langford Industries' missing heiress hung heavy in the room. Because if Claire Langford didn't want to be found, she might have picked the one place no one expected. The sun had dipped low behind the grade ridge, casting long, golden streaks across the shop floor. Jake worked quietly beneath the lifted frame of a beat-up Jeep, the clatter of tools softened by the hush of early evening. The garage door was open just enough to let in the breeze, warm and laced with the scent of pine and cooling asphalt. Claire had been inside the office most of the afternoon, sorting bolts by size for a shelf reorganization Jake hadn't even asked for. She said she liked having something to do, said it helped her think. He hadn't argued. From under the Jeep, Jake heard the soft murmur of her voice. Not singing this time, talking. On the phone. Her tone was hushed but sharp. Not angry exactly, but clipped, like someone walking a tightrope between frustration and control. "I told you, I'm not ready to come back," she was saying. "No, I'm not hiding. I'm thinking. There's a difference." Jake paused, wrench in hand, and listened. "You can't fix this by throwing money at it. That's the whole problem. Tell Victor I'll respond when I'm ready, not when it's convenient for shareholders." There was a long silence, broken only by the faint whir of the fan. Then, "No, don't send anyone. If you really want to respect my decision, stop acting like I've been kidnapped. I'm safe, and I'm still Claire Langford." Jake's grip on the wrench tightened. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The name hung in the air like the aftershock of a gunshot. Claire Langford. Not just Claire. The missing tech heiress plastered across every business headline in the country. Her voice softened on the next words. "I just needed to find a place where no one looked at me like I was a product." Another pause. Then the call ended with a sharp beep, followed by a sigh. Jake slid out from under the Jeep and wiped his hands, careful not to make a sound. Claire stepped out of the office a moment later, back to her usual self-calm, warm-eyed, sleeves rolled up. "You need help with the inventory labels?" she asked. He looked at her for a second too long before nodding. "Yeah, that'd be great." He didn't say anything about what he'd heard. Not yet. Because sometimes, truth needs to sit in the quiet a while. Until both people are ready to face what comes next. It was late. Long after the garage had closed and the tools had been stowed away in their rightful spots. The air was thick with the scent of warm metal, oil, and the faint sweetness of the pine trees just beyond the shop. A low hum of crickets had replaced the usual sounds of the day, and the stars above Ridgewell flickered like they had nothing better to do. Jake sat on the old bench just outside the garage, a thermos of coffee balanced on his knee. Claire was next to him, legs tucked up beneath her, fingers curled around a chipped mug Maddie had left behind one night and forgotten. She hadn't said much since dinner. Neither had he. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the kind that let things rise to the surface in their own time. "I used to think I had the best job in the world," Claire said finally, her voice quiet. "Everyone knew my name. People smiled too wide, nodded too hard, told me I was brilliant even when I knew I wasn't." Jake glanced at her, but didn't speak. Just waited. "But then I started noticing things," she continued. "The way people looked at me before I walked into a room versus after they Googled me. How Claire didn't exist anymore, only Langford. Only what I could give them." She stared out at the night, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I couldn't tell who was real. Who wanted to be near me because of Manat, the board seat or the name or the money. Even friends felt curated. Like the world had turned into this polished, high-def version of reality and I was just a brand inside it." Jake nodded slowly, watching the steam rise from his cup. "So you left?" She looked over at him. "I needed one honest place. Somewhere no one knew my name or cared about what I ran. I didn't come here looking for anything fancy, Jake. I just wanted to breathe." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Well, Ridgewell's got air to spare. It's the one thing this place'll never run out of." Claire laughed. But there was something heavy behind it. Grief, maybe, or relief. Jake didn't ask her what she planned to do next. He just passed her the thermos, let the silence settle again, and stayed beside her as the night stretched long and quiet and real. The next afternoon, the garage doors were flung wide open, letting in a steady stream of late spring sunlight. The scent of cut grass drifted in on the breeze, mixing with the usual perfume of oil, rubber, and heat. Jake was hunched over the hood of an old Ford that hadn't run right in years, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a streak of black grease trailing down one forearm like war paint. Claire stood beside him, holding a wrench with the careful focus of someone trying not to mess it up. "Okay," Jake said, glancing at her over the top of his sunglasses. "Loosen that bolt right there half a turn, slow and steady." Claire crouched slightly, hands tight on the tool. "You sure you want me doing this?" "You already passed the hardest test," Jake said. "Oh, what's that?" "You showed up again." She gave him a look, but her lips curved up as she turned the wrench, her movements hesitant but careful. A soft clunk followed, and Jake nodded in approval. "There you go, natural." Claire wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge across her temple. Jake didn't mention it. She looked more at ease than he'd ever seen. Her hair pulled into a loose bun, a borrowed flannel tied around her waist, fingers smudged with oil. In the corner of the shop, an old radio crackled with static before slipping into a smooth, bluesy guitar riff. Jake let the music fill the space between them, the kind of sound that didn't ask questions, just filled the silence without demanding anything in return. Claire leaned back against the car, breathing heavier than she expected. "No wonder your arms look like that. This stuff's a workout." Jake laughed. "Should have told you car repair was just another form of therapy. Grease and grit, better than half the self-help books out there." She smiled, then looked around the shop like she was seeing it for the first time as a dusty old garage, but as something else. Something steady, Real. Thanks for teaching me, she said quietly. Jake shrugged. Everyone's got something to fix. He didn't say what was unspoken, that not everything broken was made of metal. And as Claire picked up the next tool, shoulder brushing his just slightly, it felt for both of them like maybe, just maybe, the repairs were finally starting. The clip was barely a minute long. Grainy, unplanned, caught from across the street by a teenager on his phone who had just stopped for a soda at Maddie's diner. It showed Jake hunched over the open hood of a vintage Mustang, his sleeves rolled, sun glinting off the sweat on his neck. Claire stood beside him, laughing as he explained something with a socket wrench in hand, smudges on her cheek and grease on her jeans. It was casual, real. Something about the easy rhythm between them made it feel more like a scene from a feel-good movie than a small-town Tuesday. By the time Jake found out about it, the video had already racked up over 80,000 views. "I'm not even on social media," he grumbled, staring at Maddie's phone like it might explode. "You are now," Maddie said, grinning as she slid a mug of coffee in front of him. #garage goals. Apparently you and Claire have a fan base. He shook his head, but Claire sitting across from him at the counter was biting back a smile. "You're trending," she teased. "Guess I'm not the only one who sees something special in this place." Jake raised an eyebrow. "I didn't fix that carburetor for likes." "No," Claire said more softly now. "You fixed it because it needed fixing. That's exactly why people are watching." Later that week, Jake got a call from a startup based 2 towns over young tech types trying to support rural small businesses. They'd seen the clip and wanted to help digitize Bennett's Auto. Scheduling systems, online booking, remote diagnostics. It wasn't something he'd ever considered, but they were offering to cover the first phase for free as a pilot project, something about showcasing authentic mechanics. Jake listened, unsure what to say. It wasn't his world. Apps and cloud storage and virtual garages. His was a world of wrenches and intuition. But Claire stood beside him while he took the call, giving him that quiet look she gave when she believed in something more than she said. "You think I should do it?" he asked after he hung up. She shrugged. "I think the world's finally noticing what's been here all along." Jake looked around his garage, at the tools passed down from his dad, the patched flooring, the handwritten invoices, and then at Claire, still wearing his flannel from yesterday. Maybe change didn't have to mean losing who you were. Maybe it just meant letting a few more people in to see it. The diner was louder than usual that morning, the kind of buzz that hummed just beneath the clinking of silverware and the hiss of the coffee machine. It wasn't about the usual town gossipno talk of who forgot to pay their water bill, or which high schooler was caught sneaking smokes behind the bleachers. This was different. The kind of talk that came in half-lowered voices and wide-eyed glances over steaming mugs. Maddie noticed it first when old Roy Jenkins pulled out his tablet, something he only used for reading weather reports and watching war documentaries. But now, he was jabbing the screen with a thick finger, turning it to show the woman next to him. "Swear to God, that's her," he whispered, pointing at the glossy image on a national news site. The headline blared, "Claire Langford still missing, billionaire tech Heiress vanishes days before merger." Maddie walked over, squinting at the screen. There she was, hair pinned back, designer blazer. Poised, powerful. The exact opposite of the woman currently helping Jake unload tires across the street at the garage, laughing in a flannel and jeans, grease smudged under her nails. "No way," someone said. "You think it's really her?" "I heard she paid for her coffee with exact change," muttered another. "Billionaires don't carry cash. She's been helping Jake. Working. You think someone like that needs to change oil for fun?" The buzz turned into a current, running table to table until it was more than just whispers. Jake heard it too. When he walked into the diner for his usual takeout, Claire trailing behind, hair damp from the morning rain, every conversation stalled. Forks paused mid-air. Phones lit up on the counters. And the silence that followed was louder than anything spoken. Maddie met his eyes over the counter. One look was enough. "She knows," Maddie said quietly, handing him the brown paper bag. "It broke big this morning. I didn't tell her." Figured it wasn't my story to tell. Jake glanced at Claire, who was staring at a crumpled newspaper someone had left behind. Her face was calm, but her eyes were different now, wary, distant. It was no longer a question of if people knew. It was just a matter of what they'd do with that knowledge. And whether Ridgewell was still big enough to hold her secrets. The garage felt colder than usual, even with the afternoon sun pressing through the open doors. Jake stood by the workbench, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching Claire as she wiped down a set of wrenches with the same focus she'd had all week. But today, it felt forced, like she was trying to keep her hands busy so her thoughts wouldn't catch up. "You gonna tell me?" Jake asked, voice low, steady. Claire paused mid-wipe, her back to him. "Tell you what? Don't play it like that." He took a step forward. "Claire Langford, billionaire tech heiress, vanished CEO. You've been front-page news since yesterday." She slowly turned, expression unreadable. "So you saw it." "Everyone saw it," Jake said. "Whole damn town knows now." She said nothing. Jake ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps before stopping again. "You told me you were just passing through, that you were looking for quiet. I figured maybe you were getting away from something, but I didn't think—" He stopped himself. "You lied." "I didn't lie," Claire said sharply. "I just didn't tell you everything." He laughed, bitter and short. "That's a nice way to say you lied." Claire's face hardened. "You think it's easy, walking into a place like this with my name? People look at you like you're made of money, like you don't get to feel real things because you've got a number next to your name." Jake stared at her, something tight in his chest. "I'm not people. I'm me. You could have told me." Claire looked away, her voice softer now. "I didn't want to ruin it." "Ruin what?" "This," she said, motioning to the garage. "You, Lily, the diner, the quiet, the way people looked at me like I was someone, not some headline." Jake swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it wasn't real." "It was," Claire said fiercely. "At least to me." Silence fell between them, heavy and raw. Then she dropped the rag on the bench, grabbed her bag from the office, and turned for the door. "Claire," Jake called after her. She didn't stop, didn't look back, because when trust breaks, it doesn't always shatter with a scream. Sometimes it just walks out the door. The rain returned that night, soft and relentless, tapping against the garage windows like a memory that wouldn't let go. Jake sat alone at his workbench, the shop dark, except for the small lamp glowing above him. His hands were idle, fingers resting on a half-dismantled carburetor he hadn't touched in over an hour. Across the room, the photograph still hung crooked on the bulletin board. Most people probably didn't notice it, the faded edges, the tiny tear in the corner. A woman with bright eyes and windblown hair leaned against an old red Chevy, Jake beside her, grinning like the world couldn't touch them. Her name was Erin. He hadn't spoken it in months. He heard Lily's soft footsteps before she spoke. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in her blanket, her voice small. "You okay, Dad?" Jake forced a smile. "Just thinking." She patted closer and leaned against him. "Is it about Claire?" Jake hesitated. "Yeah, her and some other things." Lily didn't press. She never did. She just sat with him, patient in that way only kids seemed to understand when adults couldn't find the words. After a long silence, Jake said, "Did I ever tell you how your mom died?" Lily shook her head. He stared at his hands, jaw clenched. "She was driving home from work. It was late. She was on that stretch of Route 17, near the quarry. A truck came into her lane, driver asleep, but the car she was in, it didn't react." Lily's brow furrowed. "Why?" "It was one of those early self-driving prototypes," Jake said, his voice low. "It was supposed to override in case of danger, supposed to protect her." Lily was quiet. Jake's throat tightened. "It didn't. The software failed. There was an investigation. Some design flaw in the sensor calibration. They tried to bury it, said it was unpredictable. But I read the reports. I know the name stamped on that system. He looked up at the rain-tracing lines down the garage window. Langford. Lily didn't say a word. She just rested her head against his arm. And Jake sat there in the dark, caught between two truths he couldn't escape. The woman who'd left, and the one who'd built the machine that didn't stop. The rain hadn't let up by morning. It was the kind of gray that pressed against the windows and soaked into your bones. Claire sat alone in Maddie's diner, the corner booth empty except for her coffee, untouched and gone cold. She'd heard about Jake's wife, an hour ago heard it from Maddie, who hadn't meant to say it but had said it anyway. The words tumbling out with that same quiet sympathy people use when they don't realize how deep a wound really goes. Self-driving failure, Langford Hardware. Her name. Her company. Claire hadn't spoken since. She stared out the window, her reflection blurred in the glass. The town looked different now. Smaller. Farther away. Like she'd stepped out of whatever bubble had let her pretend she belonged here. She barely noticed the bell above the door when Maddie returned from the back, wiping her hands on a towel. "You okay?" Claire shook her head slowly. "No." Maddie sat across from her, watching her closely. "You didn't know." "But I should have," Claire whispered, voice cracking. "God, Maddie, it was our tech. Our failure. I built that division. I signed off on those road tests. I used to brag about our safety scores." She looked down, hands clenched into fists on the table. "People like Jake, people, like his wife, they were just data points to me. Case numbers on a report I barely read before moving on to the next product launch." Maddie was quiet for a moment. "You didn't cause the accident." "No," Claire said, tears gathering now. "But I made it possible. I helped build a system that let someone die, and then walked away from it like it wasn't my problem." She wiped her eyes, but it was no use. The dam had cracked. "I thought coming here would help me find something real, something honest. But I was living in someone else's peace, borrowing it. Pretending I hadn't helped take that same peace from Jake." Maddie reached across the table, laid a hand over Claire's. "He trusted you," she said gently. "He still might." Claire looked at her, broken wide open. "I don't know if I deserve that." And in the silence that followed, the weight of guilt settled on her chest like a storm with no end in sight. Jake found the envelope on the workbench the next morning. It was resting beside his coffee thermos, edges curled slightly from the damp. His name was written across the front, in careful, looping script. Jacano last name, no flourish, just that. Like she knew he'd understand without needing anything more. He stared at it for a long time before picking it up. The garage was quiet. The only sounds, the slow tick of the wall clock and the creak of the old rafters above. Outside, Ridgewell was waking up, but inside, the world felt still suspended in the moment between opening the letter and knowing what came next. He unfolded the single sheet of paper. "Jake, I don't know how to start this, so I'll just say it. I'm sorry not for who I am, but for what I brought into your life without knowing. I didn't come here to lie. I came to disappear. I thought if I stripped away the name, the company, the weight, I could remember who I used to be before everything got so loud. And then I met you. You were quiet, in the way that mattered, honest, steady. You fixed things not for money or praise, but because someone needed help. You reminded me of everything I forgot existed in the world. And Lily. She saw me before I even remembered how to see myself. But I need you to know something that's heavier than all of that. Your wife, what happened to Heiress, was our fault. Mine. Langford's. We built something we couldn't control and we buried the consequences because it was easier than facing them. I didn't know until Maddie told me, but knowing now, I can't stay. Not until I figure out how to carry that truth and still look you in the eye. This isn't an apology. It's not enough to call it that. It's a thank you for letting me be someone else for a while. Someone real. Take care of Lily, and take care of yourself. You both deserve more than what I can offer right now." Claire Jake stood there, letter trembling in his hand. She hadn't left a number. No forwarding address. Just word sync on paper, honest and raw, and a silence too wide to fix with a wrench. The days slipped into weeks, and the weeks folded into months. Ridgewell moved on, the way small towns always did, slow and steady, the seasons changing like clockwork. Summer gave way to the early bite of autumn, and the mornings turned crisp, the kind of cold that settled in your bones before sunrise. Jake showed up to the garage every day, like always. He turned wrenches, rotated tires, replaced belts, rebuilt engines. The motions stayed the same. But something behind them didn't. There was a silence now. Not the peaceful kind, not the good quiet he used to find at the end of a long day. This was the hollow kind, the kind that hung heavy in the corners, in the empty stool across from his workbench, in the untouched coffee mug Claire used to fill half full and always forget to finish. She hadn't come back, not once. Jake never told anyone about the letter, not even Maddie. He kept it folded in the top drawer of his desk, tucked between an old invoice pad and a faded photo of Erin. Every now and then, he'd take it out, stare at the words without really reading them, and then put it back like it burned. Lily noticed, even if she didn't say it. One night over dinner, she poked at her mashed potatoes with her fork, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think Claire's okay?" Jake looked up, caught off guard. "Yeah, I think she is. She didn't say goodbye. She left a letter." "But not to me," Lily said, eyes glistening. "I thought she liked being here. I thought we made her happy." Jake's throat tightened. He reached across the table, covering her small hand with his. "You did, kiddo. She just had things she needed to work through." Lily nodded, biting her lip. "I miss her." Jake didn't say me too, but it sat there in the silence between them, loud and full of static. He worked, he parented. He smiled when he needed to, but there was a weight in his chest he hadn't been able to shake, and it echoed every time he glanced at the door, half expecting to hear that bell chime again and see her standing there, still wearing his flannel, still trying to remember who she was. It started with a headline. Claire Langford breaks silence, former tech Heiress speaks out in live interview. Jake didn't see it right away. It was Maddie who burst through the garage office door, phone clutched in her hand, eyes wide. "She's on," she said, breathless. "Turn on the TV." Jake frowned, wiping grease from his hands. "Who's on?" "Claire." The name hit him square in the chest. By the time he reached the break room, the screen was already lit up with the image of Claire Langford, no longer hiding behind borrowed flannels and half-truths, but sitting under the harsh lights of a live network interview. The set was sleek and modern, but Claire looked out of place in it. She wore a simple navy dress, hair pulled back, no jewelry. There was no branding, no polish, just her. The interviewer's voice cut in. "So, Claire, you disappeared. You walked away from Langford Industries in the middle of a billion-dollar merger. People say you ran." Claire met the camera head-on. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried something deeper. "I didn't run. I left. And I left because I couldn't look at what we were building anymore and pretend it was still about people." She spoke clearly, calmly, about the board's obsession with control, about how profit had overtaken ethics, about systems rushed to market without proper oversight. She talked about the reports that had been buried, the whistleblowers, silenced. And then, with a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, she said it. There was a system failure, a fatal one. It cost a woman her life. And we buried it. I let that happen. I didn't read the report the way I should have. I trusted people who didn't deserve it. And I'm done letting that slide. The studio went quiet. "I'm stepping away," she continued. "From the company, from the board, from the name. Langford can survive without me. But I can't survive if I keep pretending that what happened wasn't partly my fault." Jake watched, unmoving, as the screen zoomed in just a little closer on her face. She looked different, now lighter, even through the heaviness of her words. And though she didn't say it out loud, every syllable sounded like it was meant for someone far away, in a quiet garage, in a town too small for news vans. For someone who still mattered. The phone rang just past 7 p.m., cutting through the hum of the old ceiling fan above Jake's kitchen table. He was halfway through balancing a stack of invoices, Lily sprawled nearby doing homework, her pencil tapping in a slow rhythm. Most calls at that hour were spam or Maddie reminding him to bring extra chairs for Sunday dinner. He almost let it go to voicemail until he saw the number. Unknown, no location. But something about it made him stop. He answered on the third ring. Yeah? There was a pause. Then, a breath. Familiar. Soft. Careful. Hey, Jake. His heart skipped. He stood slowly, walking to the back door, as if instinctively needing space. Quiet. Air. Claire. Another pause, but this time she didn't fill it with explanations. I saw the video, he said. I figured you might. You meant it? He asked, not unkindly, just uncertain. Claire's voice came through like a steady line on a stormy radio, quiet but real. Every word. I wasn't trying to fix anything with that interview. Not the company. Not my name. I just needed to say the truth. Jake leaned against the porch rail, the sun dipping low behind the trees, turning the yard into shades of bronze and shadow. I wanted to call sooner, she continued. But I didn't want to bring any of the noise back into your life. You didn't ask for any of this. I didn't, he agreed. But I didn't ask you to leave either. Claire's breath hitched. I know, and I'm sorry. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was full of something unspoken, something tender, uncertain. I'm in Maine, she said quietly. At a friend's cabin near the coast. No boardrooms, no headlines. Just me and the ocean and a very judgmental cat. Jake chuckled, despite himself. Sounds like you're surviving. Some days, she said. Some days I think about Ridgewell, the garage, Lily, you. Jake closed his eyes. We think about you too. I'm not asking for anything, Claire said softly. No second chances, no promises. I just needed to hear your voice. He stood there in the fading light, words slow to come. I'm glad you called, Claire, and for the first time in a long while. Neither of them felt quite so far away. Jake stood alone in the garage, arms folded, eyes fixed on the half-repaired engine in front of him. The shop lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting soft shadows on the floor, but he wasn't really seeing any of it. Claire's voice still echoed in his head, not just the words she'd spoken over the phone, but the way she'd said them, gentle, uncertain, honest, in a way that didn't try to fix what couldn't be fixed. He hadn't told Lily about the call. Not yet. Maybe because part of him didn't know what it meant. Maybe because the name Langford still lodged somewhere in his chest like a splinter he couldn't quite pull free. He missed her. God, he missed her. The way she laughed with her whole face, like she hadn't done it in years. The grease stains on her hands that never seemed to bother her. The way she watched Lily's robot projects like they were little miracles. But missing someone wasn't the same as forgiving them. And Claire wasn't just a person, she was a legacy. A name stamped on the system that failed his wife. A name that bought silence when Jake was screaming for answers. A name that reminded him that sometimes the powerful got to walk away clean. The worst part was, Claire had never pretended to be innocent. She didn't deny what her company had done. She didn't offer excuses. And that made it harder, not easier. It would have been simpler if she'd just been a villain. The front door creaked open, and Lily stepped into the shop, her coat zipped to her chin, hair tucked into a beanie too big for her. You okay? She asked. Jake blinked, realizing he hadn't moved in nearly 10 minutes. Yeah, just thinking. About Claire? He looked at her, startled. Lily shrugged. I figured. You always get quiet when you miss someone. Jake smiled faintly, then nodded. Yeah, about Claire. Lily moved closer, tugging at a wrench with her small hands. If she came back, would we be mad at her? Jake didn't answer right away. He just looked at his daughter, at the spark in her eyes that Claire used to light up. Second chances, he said quietly, aren't free. You have to fight for them. Forgive, without forgetting. Lily tilted her head. Would you fight for her? Jake looked down at his hands, steady, worn, unsure. I don't know, he said honestly. But I think I want to try. It was one of those slow Saturday mornings, the kind where the world outside felt hushed by fog and time stretched a little longer between coffee sips and toast crumbs. Jake sat at the kitchen table, staring into his mug like the answers might float to the surface if he stared hard enough. The garage was closed for the day, and the stillness in the house only made the space Claire had left behind feel bigger. Lily padded in, wearing mismatched socks and her favorite hoodie, dragging a crumpled blanket behind her like a cape. She climbed into the chair across from him, legs swinging, quiet for a moment as she studied his face. You thinking again? She asked, like it wasn't the first time that week she'd caught him staring at nothing. Jake smiled weakly. Yeah, just got a lot on my mind. Lily didn't say anything right away. She reached for her cereal and stirred the spoon through the milk, more focus than necessary. Then, softly, it's okay if you miss her. Jake blinked. Who? Claire, Lily said simply, like it didn't need any dressing up. I do too, but it's different for you. Jake leaned back in his chair, sighing. It's not that simple, kiddo. Maybe not, Lily said, still stirring. But you were happiest when she was here. Jake looked at her, surprised by how direct she was. She wasn't a kid who said things just to say them. She noticed. She listened. She remembered. I know she messed up, Lily continued, eyes fixed on her bowl. And I know you're still mad. But I saw how you looked at her. You smiled more. You laughed at dumb things. You fixed stuff together, without even talking. Jake rubbed a hand over his face. You're too smart for your own good. Lily shrugged. Mom made you happy once. Claire did too. Doesn't mean you have to pick. Just means maybe some people come back when they're supposed to. Jake stared at her for a long moment, his heart heavy and warm at the same time. She was real, he said quietly. Lily finally looked up and smiled. I know. And in that small kitchen, with the fog pressing in and the day still beginning, Jake realized something simple. And true, his daughter had seen what he hadn't been ready to admit. Sometimes, the people who break something in you are the same ones who help you heal it. The road stretched out in front of him like a ribbon, unwinding through the countryside long, winding, quiet. Jake had been driving for nearly 2 days, the old trailer rattling behind his truck, carrying something he'd spent the last month building in silence, not just a car, but a message, a gesture, maybe even a beginning. He didn't call, didn't text, he just went. Claire had mentioned Maniance, briefly, a cabin near the coast where the world didn't chase her. Maddie had tracked down the name of the friend who owned it, and Jake, after too many sleepless nights, finally asked for the address. The cabin was tucked away beneath a canopy of pine, the ocean murmuring just beyond the trees. When Jake pulled up the long gravel drive, the late afternoon sun was sinking low, casting warm light over the weathered porch and the swing that hung, unmoving, from a rusted chain. Claire was sitting there, a blanket draped over her knees, a mug in hand. She looked up when she heard the engine cut, squinting into the sun. And then she froze. Jake stepped out of the truck and walked to the trailer. With quiet, careful movements, he undid the straps and lowered the ramp. The car inside gleamed with a fresh coat of powder blue, its chrome polished to a mirror. It was an old '78 Convertiblia Langford prototype, one of the first production models ever made. Claire's first car, the same one she had once told him she learned to drive in. The one she said made her feel free, before life turned into boardrooms and bodyguards. Claire stood slowly, eyes wide. Jake, what is this? He shrugged, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. Picked it up from a collector in Denver. Needed some work, but I had time. She walked toward the car, hands trembling as she touched the fender. I can't believe you remembered. I remember everything you said, Jake replied quietly. Claire turned to him, eyes glassy. Why? He took a breath, heart thudding in his chest. Because I needed to know if you still meant it what you said. About finding something real. About choosing something honest. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, not flashy, not staged, just simple. Claire stared, stunned. I didn't come here with a plan, he said. But I came with a question. He opened the box. Inside, a ring sat nestled between grease, smudged velvet. Not perfect, not flawless, but real. Can we try again? Claire didn't answer with words. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, and nodded against his chest. Because some promises don't come with fanfare. They come with a rebuilt engine, a long drive, and the courage to ask. The stars came out slowly that night, one by one, like they were taking turns lighting the sky. The ocean whispered beyond the trees, and the wind carried the salt through the open cabin windows. Jake and Claire sat out back, away from the world, away from the past, the repaired car gleaming softly in the moonlight behind them. No titles, no pressure, no noise. Just two people, and the space between them no longer wide, no longer heavy. Claire curled her hands around a chipped mug of tea, bare feet tucked beneath her. Jake leaned back in an old Adirondack chair, his fingers stained from the drive, a comfort he no longer needed to hide. You didn't have to fix the car, she said, her voice quiet. I didn't do it for the car, he replied. Claire smiled softly, glancing at him. I figured. They sat for a long while, saying nothing, but it wasn't silence anymore. It was understanding. It was the kind of peace that only comes after everything's been broken and slowly, painfully, put back together. I used to think I had to earn people's love, Claire said after a while. Like I had to prove I was more than my name, more than the company. I spent years building something that never really knew me. Jake watched her, not interrupting. But when I was in Ridgewell, with you, it was the first time I felt seen without performing. Like I wasn't a version of myself. I was just Claire. Jake took a sip of his coffee, then looked at her. You were always Claire. I just waited for you to believe it. She let out a slow breath, eyes glistening but calm. And you? He shrugged. I stopped fixing things I couldn't change a long time ago, but you made me want to try again. Claire reached out, her fingers brushing his. So what now? Jake smiled. We figure it out. Together. No headlines, no noise. They sat like that for a long time, no longer mechanic and heiress, not fixer and broken. Just two people who had finally tuned into the same signal, borrowed once, but now, finally, theirs. The fire crackled low in the hearth, throwing amber light across the cabin walls. Outside, the sea churned beneath a silver sky, waves breaking rhythmically like a steady heartbeat. Jake sat on the rug, his back against the couch, fingers tracing the rim of a chipped mug that had long since gone cold. Claire sat across from him, knees drawn up, blanket draped loosely around her shoulders. They'd been quiet for a while, but this silence felt different. Not avoidance, not uncertainty, just waiting. For something that needed to be said. Jake cleared his throat, his voice low. You never asked about her, Aaron. Claire looked up slowly, meeting his eyes. I didn't want to push. You should know, he said, if we're going to do this. Claire nodded, bracing herself. Jake took a deep breath. We were married 8 years. She was stubborn as hell. Laughed too loud. Always sang in the car. She loved old music and iced coffee in the dead of winter. The kind of person who felt like home even when she was pissed at you. He paused, blinking hard. She was driving home from a night shift. I was supposed to pick her up, but I was behind on a repair and told her to take the new Karth prototype a buddy let us borrow to test out. It had an early Langford autonomous system. Lane correction, auto brake, all of it. Claire's breath caught. A truck veered into her lane, Jake said, his voice tight now. And the system didn't respond. Didn't swerve, didn't brake, just didn't do anything. She was gone before the paramedics got there. Claire stared at him, eyes glassy, her face pale in the firelight. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I spent months screaming into silence. Lawsuits, paperwork, people apologizing on behalf of the company. And not one of them meant it." He looked at her now, not with anger, but with something heavier, sadder. "I hated your name for a long time." Claire didn't flinch. She just nodded, tears brimming. "I won't defend what we did," she said softly. "I wasn't behind the wheel, but I helped build the machine. I let people cut corners. I didn't ask enough questions. That guilt lives in me now, whether you're here or not." Jake studied her. "Why'd you come back?" "Because you gave me something I didn't deserve," she whispered. "A chance to feel human again." The fire popped softly, sparks rising. Jake reached across the space and took her hand, not to forgive everything at once, but to show her that maybe, just maybe, she'd started to earn it. The sign went up in early spring, hand-painted, simple, and mounted just above the bay doors of the garage. Bennett, Langford, Workshop, Learning Center. It looked a little out of place beside the old rusted signage and oil-stained driveway. But that was the point, something new, growing from something solid. Jake stood on a ladder, squinting in the morning sun as he hammered the last nail into the wood. Claire held it steady from below, her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, paint smudged on her cheek. She grinned up at him. "You know, you could have gone with something flashier." Jake climbed down and handed her the hammer. "We don't do flashy, we do functional." Inside, the garage had been transformed, not completely, but enough. The main bay still housed old trucks and busted sedans, but the back wall now held rows of tidy workbenches, toolkits, and bins full of salvaged tech parts. A whiteboard leaned against the wall, covered in equations and half-finished sketches of robots and circuits. And in the corner, perched on a stool with her sleeves rolled up and her eyes sharp with focus, was Lily, leading a group of kids in assembling a basic motor from recycled fans and donated wires. Claire watched them from the doorway, arms crossed, a quiet pride softening her features. "They listen to her?" Jake said, stepping beside her. Claire nodded. "She's a natural." "She gets it from her mom," he said. "But the confidence? That's new. That's you." Claire looked over, surprised. "Me? You believed in her. Showed her that what she loved wasn't weirded, was powerful." Claire looked away, smiling. "I think maybe I needed to see that for myself, too." They'd spent the last few months designing this together, combining Jake's hands, on knowledge, with Claire's reach and vision. Grants, donated equipment, local volunteers, a place where kids could learn to take things apart and, more importantly, put them back together. "Feels good," Claire said softly. "Doing something that isn't about stock prices or headlines." Jake nodded. "It's more than a garage now." Claire slipped her hand into his. "It's a second chance." And as the bell above the shop door rang and the sound of laughter drifted in from the workshop floor, they knew they weren't just rebuilding machines anymore. They were rewriting what it meant to carry a name, and what it meant to leave something better behind. The "For Sale" sign had barely hit the grass when Claire pulled it out. It was a small house on the edge of Ridgewell, nestled between a row of old maples and a stretch of quiet road that led to nowhere important. The roof needed a little work, the porch sagged in the corner, and the inside smelled faintly of dust and old books, but to Claire, it felt perfect. Not like a hideout, not like a layover, but like a decision. Jake pulled up just as she was unlocking the front door, his truck rumbling to a stop behind her rented sedan. He stepped out slowly, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with that half-smile he wore when he didn't know whether to tease her or kiss her. "So," he said. "You buying or squatting?" Claire turned to him, grinning. "Buying. Paperwork signed. Closing next week." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're ready to give up that ocean breeze and coffee on the cliffs?" Claire shrugged. "Turns out I like the smell of motor oil and burnt toast more." He chuckled, stepping onto the porch. "What made you choose this place?" She looked around at the chipped shutters, the overgrown garden, the fence that would need replacing, and smiled softly. Because it's not shiny, it's not curated. It's mine, and I chose it. She glanced back at him. This time, I'm not passing through, I'm building something. Jake reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. So, this is home now? Claire nodded. Yeah, it is. Inside, the floors creaked and the windows stuck. But the light poured through the front room like it belonged there. A future could grow in places like this. Quiet, rooted, real. Later that week, Lily would bring over a box of books and claim a spot on the window seat. Jake would fix the porch swing. Claire would plant flowers, badly, and laugh when half of them came up crooked. And no one would call it temporary. Because Claire Langford had walked away from the world once, and now, she was choosing where to stay. The garage was quiet that night, golden with the last streaks of sun slipping through the wide bay doors. Claire stood at the far end, sleeves rolled to her elbows, elbow deep in an old carburetor Jake had sworn was just for practice. The workbench was cluttered with parts bolts, gaskets, and a smudge-covered notepad with Jake's barely legible handwriting in the margins. You sure this isn't a setup? Claire called over her shoulder. Feels too clean for something that's supposed to be busted. Jake leaned against the wall, arms crossed, trying and failing not to smile. Might be. I just did too good a job wrecking it. She narrowed her eyes, pulling the top plate off carefully, only to pause. There, nestled inside the hollow of the carburetor, between two coils and a tiny handwritten note that simply read, "Still want to build something together?" was a ring, not shiny or flashy. A thin band of brushed silver, simple and solid, with a tiny gear inset into the band, a nod to the grease and grit that had brought them here. Claire blinked, her breath catching, hands still hovering in the air like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. "Jake," she whispered. He walked over slowly, pulling a rag from his back pocket, wiping his hands as he went. "I figured, if I was going to do this," he said, his voice low and steady, "I should do it in a way that makes sense to us. You fix the world one broken piece at a time. I fix engines, and this thing here," he nodded at the carburetor, "was busted for a long time." Claire looked up at him, tears threatening to blur her vision. "Are you asking me to marry you with a piece of automotive equipment?" Jake grinned. "Wouldn't have it any other way." She laughed, swiping at her face, then reached for the ring with grease-streaked fingers. "Yes," she said, breathless. "Yes, you absolute idiot." He didn't wait. He pulled her in, arms wrapping tight around her waist, and kissed her right there, surrounded by tools and dust and everything that had brought them back to life. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was real. And it was theirs. The garage looked different, now bigger, brighter, but still stitched with the same heart it had always had. The original bay remained, though it had been cleaned up and reinforced with new siding. Beside it stood a sleek addition, glass windows, solar panels, and inside, rows of workbenches where kids pieced together drones, circuit boards, and stripped down engines with wide eyes and grease-stained hands. A mural stretched across the side, wall-painted by a local artist. It showed a gear meshed with a blooming tree, and beneath it, a small line of text in bold lettering, "Built, not bought." Lily stood at the front desk, taller now, voice steady as she welcomed a new customer through the door, a teenage girl holding a busted laptop in one hand and a bent bike wheel in the other. "Is this the place that does the free workshops?" the girl asked. Lily smiled, nodding. "You're in the right spot. We'll teach you how to fix both, and how to charge your own battery pack if you stick around long enough." The girl looked around in awe. "This place is amazing. How did it all start?" Lily glanced over at the wall behind the counter, where a framed photograph hung. It showed her, years younger, standing between Jake and Claire, Jake in his faded flannel, Claire in a grease-smudged hoodie, both of them smiling like they hadn't yet realized how much their lives had changed. "It started with a phone call," Lily said simply. The girl blinked. "A phone call?" "Yeah." Lily leaned on the counter, her voice dipping like she was about to share a secret. A woman's car broke down. My dad gave her his phone. He didn't know who she was. She didn't know who she wanted to be, but that moment standing in the rain, asking for help, it changed everything. Outside, Claire walked across the lot with a clipboard, laughing with a group of students. Jake was by the old Mustang, teaching a kid how to tighten a timing belt with patience carved into every movement. The world kept moving. Engines still stalled. Kids still asked too many questions. But this place, they had built it together. And the signal that brought them to each other? It never dropped. It just grew stronger with time.